Hi, in this workshop I'll be going over Java basics all the way up to creating your own Java programs. It is important to keep in mind that this is a lot of information all at once and it is meant to help you get to the point that you can create a program for a hackathon. That being said, this tutorial may be a little fast-paced and not too in-depth on terminology at times. Open up Eclipse, you should have a screen that looks like this, maybe different colors. But before we even start creating any projects, writing any code, I want to show you something that I wish someone took the time to show me when I first started using Eclipse. Let's say you accidentally close this window or this window and you want them back, but you don't know how to get them back now. Go to Window, Perspective, Reset Perspective. This could end up saving you a lot of time later on. And these two windows on the side, we're not going to be using them for now, so you can go ahead and close them to leave more room for your code. So we're going to start by creating a new Java project over here on the left. We can call this anything we want, like RowdyHacks 20. And then right now, don't worry about any of the middle information. Just go ahead and hit finish. Don't create a module info. That's just going to mess up your program for now. Now we'll have our newly created Java project over here in the Package Explorer on the left. Go ahead and hit the drop down arrow to see the contents. We won't need to touch anything in the JRE system library. That's the Java runtime environment. But right now we're just going to need to right click on the source folder, new, and create a new Java class. So here we can call it anything we want. We can call it hello since it's our first program. In this one we're going to want to click right here, the public static void main. This will create a main method in our program. And if you don't know what any of these terms mean right now, we'll go ahead and explain those later, but right now don't worry about it. Then hit finish. Now the IDE should have auto-generated our class up here and a main method here. So in Java you have classes and then methods go inside of the classes. And every program will have a main method. This is kind of where your program starts. And right now we're going to just write a line of code. You can copy mine and then we'll go and explain it. So right now this is just a print statement that'll print to the console, and we're going to add what we want to print out to the console in quotes on the inside. Let's write hello world. So if we created our program correctly, if we go here, click the green run hello.java button, then down at the console right here, it should print out hello world or whatever you typed in these parentheses. Let's go over some of the basics of what's on the screen. One of the first things you'll notice is the curly braces up here at the top, and then their matching ones down at the bottom. It's important to always make sure that these braces line up. This will be especially important when we're discussing loops and conditional statements. Eclipse has a helpful feature that if you click next to a brace, it will place a box around its matching brace. Like if I click this one up here, you can see its closed brace is down here at the bottom, as well as the one for this method. On line 5, you'll notice that there's this comment. This is not taken into consideration with the code because it is prefaced with 2 forward slashes. So anything I type with 2 forward slashes like this will not actually be executed. So this is one way to do a comment, or you can do /* and this should be auto-completed by Eclipse. This is a multi-line comment that will automatically grow in size depending how big you'll need it. These are helpful when you're trying to plan out something. Like you don't really know the code you're going to write yet, but you know what you want the code to do. You can add comments inside of your code. Types. The ones that we're going to be going over are going to be int, double, string, and char. These are the most commonly used ones. And we'll also be going over how to declare these as static variables, meaning we're going to assign them a value. So at first it will be type, the name that we want to use to reference them, and then we're going to set them equal to a value. And then all Java statements are usually ended with a semicolon, meaning that that is the terminator for that line. So if I want to set the name x equal to the value of 4, it would be int x is equal to 4. Double is like an integer, but it's capable of holding decimal points. So double, we'll call this one y, can be equal to 4.5. But if I tried setting int to 4.5 as well, you'll get an error because integers cannot be decimals. And string is any word or combinations of words. So string sent for sentence is equal to, this will be in quotes, happy hacking. And a char is just a character. So char C, we can even set that equal to C. Now we'll learn how to read in values from the user using the console. We saw how to declare these values statically, but to be able to read in these values, we're going to have to first import the Java utilities package, which is done at the top, import java.util. And for right now, we'll just import all of them using the star. And don't forget to put a semicolon. So to read in values, you're going to have to use something called scanner. And so it's a object, so we'll call it scanner. And it's just the name we'll use to reference the scanner. We'll call it scan. That's going to be equal to a new scanner. And since we're reading from the console, we're going to use system.in. System is the console, and .in means we're giving it input. So now using the print line we learned earlier, we can ask the user to please enter a value. Well, to be more specific, we could say please enter a whole number value. And since it is going to be a whole number, this would be a integer. So int x is equal to, this is where we use our scanner. We'll call it scan dot, and Eclipse gives us a lot of suggestions. We're going to use next int. This means capture the next integer entered. So scan dot next int, just hit enter on that one. And don't forget to put a semicolon. Now when we run the program, it's going to first print out please enter a whole number value, and then we will enter the value, let's say 5, and x will now be equal to 5. But since we didn't do anything with that value, it skips back down to the hello world line that we had. But instead of printing out hello world, we can actually change this to print out the value that we entered above. So now if we run it, and we enter a value, let's say 2020, it'll print out the value that we entered above. Comparison operators in Java. These are equals, greater than equal to, less than equal to, not equal to, or just greater than and less than. So in Java, equals is actually going to be two equal signs when you're comparing. And if things are not equals, this would be exclamation point equals, exclamation point meaning not. And then less than and greater than are exactly the same, but following the equals and not equals, when it's less than or equal to, it's less than then an equal sign, or greater than equal to. Knowing these, you'll be able to write conditional statements such as if. And the syntax for an if is if, parentheses, and inside the parentheses will be a condition. So we say if x is greater than 0, and then the curly braces, make sure every open one closes. So if x is greater than 0, then we can print out that they have entered a positive number. So something that Eclipse does is tell you when you have an error. Here I can see that I spelled print line wrong, but if you click over here on the left, it'll tell you that I should change it. So I'll just go ahead and hit enter on that. So this will trigger if x is greater than 0. But what if x is 0? We can account for that with an else, if, and then another condition. So if x is equal to 0, then the code inside these braces will trigger. We'll just steal this line. And then we'll say you have entered 0. So we've accounted for x being greater than 0 and equal to 0, but what about less than 0? You can say else you have entered a negative number. So now when we run this, we can enter positive number and get you have entered a positive number. We can run it again, we can enter 0, and it'll tell us you've entered 0. And if we enter any negative number, then we'll get you have entered a negative number. Using what we just learned, we're going to make a simple calculator program. So start by commenting out the code that we are not going to use in this. We are going to keep in scanner since we're going to use that to read an input from the user. So we can start by asking them which operation they want to perform. It can be a subtraction, an addition, multiplication, or division. And let's change this to a print so they can enter it on the same line. And since these are all characters, we're going to declare a char. We'll call this the operator. That's going to be equal to scan.next. And if you remember before, we used next int, but there is no next char. So this requires a bit of outside the box thinking. It's just going to be next, which will capture everything, but sometimes it does autocomplete. Just next. And then we're going to use char at 0. And let me explain what that means. Scan.next is a string, or it's a token that evaluates to a string. And then char at 0 just means the first character in that string. So this will only take the first character entered, which would be one of these operators. So we can check this by writing operator in a print line and seeing if it's capturing our input. If we want to do subtraction, it prints subtraction. So we know that this line is working. Now we're going to need 2 inputs. Here they'll enter the first number that they want. This can either be an integer or a double, but it's safe to make it a double in case there is a decimal point after any operations. So we'll do double, let's call this first because it's the first number it entered. So next double. And just to save time, we can copy these 2 lines and just change these to second. So now we have it, when you start the program, it asks them to enter an operator, which operation they want to perform, and then the first number and the second number. Now, based off what they entered here, we will then perform that operation down here, and we're going to be using the if statements we learned previously. So if the operator is equal to subtraction. See, here we're going to get an error because we're just writing subtraction, but to be able to make it a char, we have to put it in apostrophes. So now if the operator is equal to the minus sign, then we're going to have to subtract the second number from the first number. So we should, at the top, declare something called answer that we can use to store the answer to. So we'll do answer equal to first minus second. And we're going to want to print the answer is, and now we're going to have to do something called concatenation. So to be able to print out the answer, we're going to have to say plus outside of the quotes but inside the parentheses and the answer variable. So we can now test this. We only have subtraction set up right now, so we'll do subtraction. Into the first number we do 20 minus 10, and it should say the answer is 10. You'll notice it's 10.0 because we did make answer a double. So we can now set up the else if statements for any of the other operators. We'll now do multiplication and division. Now inside the braces, we will just change the operation being done. So now that we have all of our statements set up, it should work for any of the above. We can now reverse this by doing, we can do multiplication. Let's do 5 times 4, and you'll see the answer is 20. But we can only run this program and do one calculation. So if you want to perform multiple calculations, we can say while, and then we can just say true and put that over the whole program. So since true is always going to evaluate to true, this program will just keep running until we stop it externally. So we could say plus 1 plus 1, 2. Here it might benefit us to say, well, we could just start another print line, because here you'll see these printed on the same line. So by adding a print here, we'll start over again here. And if you're just printing a blank line, you don't need to put anything in the parentheses. Minus 1, 1, 0. Now it'll ask us to, again, start a new operation. We can add plus. And now this will go on indefinitely until we stop the program. And this is how you make a simple calculator program. For this next section, I went ahead and made a new class. And just a reminder, you can do that by right-clicking Source, New, and a class. You just type your name here, and I checked here to automatically generate the main method, but you could also just type it yourself. So right now we're going to be talking about arrays, and an array is a collection of like type variables. And what I mean by that is they can be int, char, double, string, basically any data type, but those are the four main ones and the ones we've previously covered. And they can be declared two ways. So we could say the type and then the name followed by square brackets. The square brackets are an easy way to recognize arrays, or we can do type square brackets and then the name. An example of this would be an integer array, and we'll call it array int since it's an array of ints. So right now we've initiated the array, but we haven't allocated any memory to it, so it's not ready to actually hold any integers. To this, we would write array int is equal to a new integer array, and we'll give it a size of 3 for now. Now I'll just enter some integer values. Right now, these two things are not connected, but we will be able to populate this array with these values. So arrays start at index 0 and not 1. So this array is actually 0, 1, 2, and not 1, 2, 3. So what this means is the index 0 is now equal to x, which is 1. So the first element in this array is now 1. The second element and the third element we can also change. So now this array should look something like this. It'll be 1, 2, 3. With this being element 0, 1, and 2. And if I tried doing something like array int 3, let's set this equal to x, but it won't work. We'll get, if we run this, we should get an array index out of bounds because we didn't allocate enough memory for 4 spots in this array, only 3. So an easy way to print out the contents of the array is a print statement. And we'll be using something in the Java utility package. There's an arrays part to the Java utility package that will allow us to print this easier. So it is arrays.toString. There's that autocomplete. And the name of the array. So if we run the program, we'll see the contents of the array is 1, 2, 3. And this is actually element 0, 1, and 2. An easier way to write these statements would be int, let's call this one r, equal to new int. This is taking both of these lines and combining into one more efficient line. And to populate the elements of this array, we're going to be using something called a for loop. We're going to need an integer for this. The syntax is for I at a position while I is something. This one will do arrays dot the length of the array, and then I increments. And I'll take a moment to explain this a bit better. So here we declared the integer I, and then we set I equal to 0. So I right now is 0, and while I is less than the length of the array, this will increment one time up until it is no longer less than the length of the array. So we'll say array at index I, which will go 0, 1, 2, and not exceed the length of the array. Set it equal to, here we'll set another integer, set equal to num, and something, here you see plus plus, which means plus 1 each time, but you can also do things like times equals 2, and you'll see what that does in a second. Copy this line, so I starts at 0 here, so array the at index 0, which is the first element, is equal to num, which we set to 5 here. But times equals 2 just means it's now equal to times 2 its value. So 5 times 2 is 10, and in the next step, when I is equal to 1, which is the second element, it's now 10. And that just repeats 10 times 2, 20, and now the I is equal to 2, which is the third element down here, and it's now 20. So that's using a for loop to populate this array. For this next part, I commented out all of our old code that we just previously wrote, so we can write a new program in here where we will take a string input from the user and create an array of all the characters of that string. So first we're going to need to make a scanner object to read the user's input. It's going to be done by scanner scan is equal to new scanner system.in. So really you can change here where it says scan to anything. I just call it scan because it's easier to remember. And we're going to have to prompt the user to enter a string. And we'll need a variable for what they enter. So there is no next string. What we do is next line. You'll see here that next line will take in a string from the scanner, and it says everything they enter in the next line will be stored in this variable. So if they do enter something like hello world, we're not going to want to store this space in our array. So we're going to replace all of these spaces with nothing to delete that space. To do that, it's string equal to string dot replace, and we're looking for replace all, so it replaces every instance. We're going to replace a space with nothing. So now every time it finds a space, it'll delete that space. Now we'll need to make our character array to hold all the characters. Let's call it CH. Now you might realize we don't know how big to make this array because we have to allocate memory, but what we can do is just do the string, or the name of our string, dot length, and this will give us the size of our string and the same size of our array. Now to store the characters of this string into an array, we're going to have to make a for loop that will loop through the length of the string. Once again, we have I at 0, and while I is less than the length of the string, I is going to, well, first the code is going to execute in here, then I is going to increment by 1, and then keep repeating that process until this condition is no longer valid. So we'll do character array at index I, and we'll set that equal to string dot the character at index I. So the character array index I is equal to the character at index I of the string. Now if I steal one of these print lines, now if we run this program, we can enter a string like RowdyHacks is the best ever, really. Then you'll get a array of all of the characters I entered minus the spaces. You could take this step further. You can see there's some messed up capitalization here. I mean, that's probably correct there, but we could just do string is equal to string dot two. We could either do 2 uppercase or 2 lowercase. Let's do 2 uppercase. So if we run it again, type this like the SpongeBob meme, all crazy looking. It's going to be all uppercase now. And there's a lot of stuff you can do with the arrays class. You can do arrays dot sort is one of them. Gotta love that autocomplete. That kind of works. Now, if we run it, we'll get the alphabetical order of all the characters in the strings I entered. If you do this with like an integer array, you'll get the numbers in ascending order. So lowest on the left, growing to the higher numbers as you move right. It's definitely worth checking out everything that's in the java.util.arrays because there's a lot of helpful little cheat things in there that you'll probably end up using in your programs. Now we're going to create another class for a new program, and we'll call this one random because we're going to learn how to generate random numbers, which is used in a lot of game logic. So in random, we're going to have to again import the Java utilities package. And for this, we can just ask the user for a max and a min value to start. So we're going to need scanner again. And we'll prompt the user. And we'll copy that line for the minimum value as well. So to make this simple, we'll just make them integers. Int max is equal to scan.nextInt. So it captures the next integer entered. And we'll do something similar for this one. We'll call it min for a minimum value. So now we have a maximum value entered by the user and a minimum value entered by the user. Now the formula for generating a random number is going to look like int the name of the variable, and since when you use double or when you use random it comes out as a double, you have to do something called casting. So we write int in parentheses before it and that will force that number to be an integer. And then this is part of the math package in the java.utilities package, so it's math.random and then asterisk max minus min plus 1 plus min. And this line will give you a random value in the range of the min and max. We can actually copy this line to save us some typing. And it technically will work just like this, but we'll call it random int. Now we can print out our random value here. Make this a print line. And using the concatenation we learned before, and we can now run our program. So we'll enter a max value, let's just say 20, and a minimum value of 1, and generated the random value 15 as a value between 20 and 1. This can be used for things like rolling dice or calculating hit points in a game. Like if you want to make a D&D dice roller, you can use this for the different die in the game. Up until now, all of our projects have been run out of the console. So now we're going to create a graphical interface to interact with our programs. To do this, we're going to need to create a new project. So here we'll right click, new, and it's not going to be a Java project. We're going to go down to other. In other, you'll have a lot of different folders here. Select the one that says Java FX, and we're going to create a Java FX project. So we can name this, we're going to make a calculator right now, so we'll call it calc. And everything in here should be fine. Next, and deselect create module info.java file. We're not going to need that. Next again, and change the language right here to Fxml. And you can change these for just because this is an example, I'll leave them as sample and sample controller, but you can name them anything appropriate to your project. And when we hit finish, we'll notice it's created the project, and in the source we have the application package, and inside there it's automatically generated our files that we'll need to make this program. So if you open up main.java, this is where our main method is that we previously said every program will have. And then we have a controller, which is where we'll actually type the code for our program. Application.css. A CSS is a cascading style sheet. You can add code in here to uniformly format how your application will look. And sample.fxml. You can't open this in here right now, but we will. ML is a markup language. It's kind of like HTML. There will be code that goes in here that tells the program how to look and the objects that you're going to be interacting with. And this is what Scene Builder will interface with to make our program. So we're actually going to right click here and open it with Scene Builder. When you open Scene Builder, you should get something that looks like this. We're going to start with, on the left, you'll see containers. We're going to drag an anchor plane over, or anchor pane. This will give us something to start working off of. This looks a little small. Right, so we're going to make this 400 by 400. That's the default size of JavaFX programs, but you can change these numbers. Make sure you change them in your main.java file as well. So we can start by adding some controls to this. Controls are just elements that will appear on our program. We are going to look for a text field. We're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 text fields. One for them to enter the operation into, first number, second number, and the outputted answer. And we're also going to need a button that they can click to calculate the total. So we kind of have a layout here, but there's not a lot of information on here. And to add information, you can actually use the search right here. It's a label. And you can play around with these to see what a lot of different ones do. Here we'll just call it, so properties is how the things on here look. Here we can change the text of the label to not to be generic, but it is a calculator. And there, you can add prompt text in here, so it'll be kind of gray, and when they click in here to start typing, it'll disappear, but we can say operator first value, second value, and we don't really need to enter anything here for answer. So if you notice in the properties, there's a lot of different things you can do. You can have the prompt text like we just used. You can actually put text into there. You can change the font of it, how it's all aligned, add effects. And if you want to change how it looks, you could start messing around with the CSS. Layout is its location in the program. For the most part, we're not going to really be touching this too much unless you want to start adding constraints. And the code is what we'll use to actually interact with this in our Java program. So we're going to have to give this an FXID so we can reference it back in our program. We'll just call this operator. And again, we're going to have to give this one an FXID. We'll call it first, second, and we'll call this one answer. So now these all have IDs that we can reference back to in our Java code. And button is a little bit different. It's going to have an FXID too. We can call it calculate. But it's also going to have an on action because an action is going to be performed when you press it. We'll call that handle. Now we're ready to go back to our Java program in Eclipse. Okay, now we're back in our Eclipse IDE. Off camera you didn't see it, but I changed what the button says. That's just done in the properties. At the top where it says button, I just changed it to say calculate, but that won't affect how our program runs. So we won't need to change anything in main.java. All of our code is going to go into samplecontroller.java. But also if you want to see everything in our Fxml, you can right click it and open with Fxml editor here, and you should see all of the code for everything we just put on there. If not, go back and hit save in JavaFX and check this again. But right now we'll go back to our controller, and because we have a button, we're going to need an action event, and we can do that by doing public class, which is already here, and we'll write implements. It's an event handler, and then in the angular braces we'll write action event. Now we're going to get an error for this. For now, don't worry about this error, it's just because we don't have all the code in here yet. But we can click it and see that we don't have really anything for it. So we'll write the method for the button. Now it's going to be public void. If you remember, we called it handle. And inside the parentheses, we're going to write action event and our braces. Now, there's still a bit more code that needs to be put in. Here we're going to need to import action event. You'll notice there's two imports. We're writing a JavaFX program, so we're going to import the JavaFX one. And now we're also going to need to import event handler. And once again, you'll notice there's two. Import the JavaFX. And that should solve our errors. Now we're going to have to link the text field and the button that we put in our program to our actual program here. We do that by writing an Fxml tag, which is at Fxml. And this is another thing we're going to have to import the ability to do. But there's only one import, so just hit enter on this one. And you'll notice they're all automatically importing at the top. This is private text field, which is what we put on there. And we called the first one first. Now we also don't have text fields imported, so we're also going to have to import those. So add Fxml is saying it's going to be in the Fxml file. Private means it's only able to be accessed in this class, and it's a text field, and we called it first. This was the FXID that we gave it in Scene Builder. So let's go ahead and create our other ones too. We had one called second, and another one for the answer. Oh, we're actually missing one. The operator that the user first enters. And now we also had a button that we would use to calculate. And that's similar to these, so it's private, and we're going to have to import this again. Button. We have to call it first. We called it calculate. Now we can import our button. Now all these are linked to the elements on our application. So above here, there's one more tag we're going to have to add, and that is an override tag. So this is now linked to the text field where they enter the operator, but when they enter the operator on there, we need a way to get what's actually in there when the button is pressed. So to do that, we're going to have to create first a variable for it, and we know it will have to be a character, and we'll just call it char op. And to get it, we'll actually do op is equal to that text field operator. And now we're getting text from it, so dot get text. But just dot get text won't work. We're also having to do char at again, like we previously explained. And now this will get the character that is entered in the operator text field. Now we're also going to need to read in the numbers they enter for first and second. But you can't read in numbers from a text field, only strings. So first we're going to have to do string, call it 1, 2. And then 1 is going to be equal to first, which is the text field for the first value. And we're going to get the text from there. Now this is a problem because we can't perform our operations on text, but what we can do is set up some doubles. We can call them let's call them X, Y, and Z because I'm running out of names. And we can do X is equal to double dot parse double so this means double X is equal to this string, but it's taking that string and converting it into a double. So X is now equal to whatever number you entered in text field first. And we're going to do the same thing for the second text field. So now y is equal to the number in our second text field. Now we already previously wrote some simple calculator, and we can take code from that. I believe that was in hello.java. So we can copy this bit of code here, save us some time. But we're going to have to rename a lot of this. Operator, we called it just op, so we can shorten all of those. And then our answer is actually going to be z, which is a double we defined up here. So all the answers are now z. First is x, which we made here. Now that I'm changing all this, I'm starting to think it might have been faster just to type it. Second is y. And I missed this operator. Just shorten that back to op. Now we can try to run our program from main. If we run it, okay, so we first enter our operator, we do plus, we do 2, 3, and on calculate, nothing pops up here, but it does perform the calculation. So we'll close this, open up Eclipse again, and in our sample controller, we have to set the text of the text field answer. To do that, we'll do almost what we did up here, but instead of getting text, we are going to set text. So we'll just do answer dot set text. But the problem is z, our answer, is a double and not text, and we can't set a double into a text field. So to get around this, we're going to use a trick with concatenation like we learned earlier. We'll just do a blank space before z that doesn't actually have any space and just concatenate z to the end of it. So it's like it's reading a string. Now we can run it again. We'll do addition same way we did before, 2, 3, and calculate it. Now if we want to try again, we can do division, we can do 10 and 5, and we'll get 2. And now we have a working calculator. And of course this can be improved upon if you actually wanted to create different buttons for 0 through 9 and buttons for all the different operators. You could of course do that and just get the value depending on each button they press. There's a multitude of ways you can improve upon this calculator. This is just a basic one to get you familiar with how to create a graphical interface for your Java application. If you have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to me on the RowdyHacks Discord. My name's Gage. You'll see me in the Rowdy crew. And I will also be posting all of this code on GitHub so you can download it and check it out yourself.